Vaughn Grissom of Atlanta and DL Hall of Baltimore debuted over the weekend. Let's break down those appearances and then talk a little bit more Baltimore Orioles on today's Locked On MLB Prospects.
You are Locked On MLB Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On MLB Prospects, your home for all things minor league baseball. I'm your host, Lindsey Crosby, baseball writer for Sports Illustrated. Thank you for making this your first listen every single day. And prospect debuts over the weekend. Would have gotten to it yesterday, but obviously Mailbag Monday comes first. We give the people what they want on this show. But the Atlanta Braves, second base is seemingly cursed for them. Ozzie Albies is out for probably until September with that foot injury, and they've rotated through other guys. The corpse of Robinson Cano. They tried just Orlando Arcia, bunch of guys. Ehire Adrianza, like went and traded for him to get him back. Tried a bunch of guys there, and injuries, ineffectiveness, things like that. So they call up new number one prospect, Vaughn Grissom, after they called up Michael Harris. And Grissom and Harris kind of similar, right? So both of them 2019 picks, kind of later. One was 5th, one was 11th round. But then also guys that started the year off in their first taste of Double-A. And so didn't have a ton of time in Double-A before skipping Triple-A, coming straight to the bigs. It worked with Michael Harris. He was there all year. He looked the part in Double-A, but when he got called up, very much was a risk. 50 or so games in Double-A. Vaughn Grissom was promoted to Double-A earlier in the season, and so had even less time at Double-A than Harris did. But so far, it's worked out. And caveat, it's a very small sample size. But, so Vaughn Grissom, 5 games so far. I'm not counting Monday night's Braves-Mets game because they were in a rain delay. Still don't quite know what's going to happen there. So 5 games, 20 plate appearances for Vaughn Grissom, 18 at-bats, 7 hits, a double, and 2 home runs. He's got 4 RBIs. He stole a base, 2 walks to 5 strikeouts. The slash line, not that it matters. It's a 5-game sample, 389, 457, 78. The big thing here is, being 6'3", 210, being a bigger guy, there was a question about whether or not he could stick it short. He's playing second right now because you have Dansby Swanson, but I think you're giving what I love about this. I feel like a lot of teams would pay a ton of money for this situation right here. The Atlanta Braves have a decision to make this offseason on Dansby Swanson. He is a free agent. Presumably, they have offered him the same kind of below market deal that everybody else took already. Austin Riley, most recently, but most notably Ozzie Albies and Ronald Acuna. And so a lot of this team is locked up. You've got Eddie Rosario for another year or 2 in the outfield. Michael Harris is obviously 6 years of control. Ronald Acuna is around for another 8 years or so. Infield, Matt Olson's around for 8 years. Ozzie Albies has, I think, 7 years left on that deal. Austin Riley just signed for 10 years. And so the question was, what do you do with Dansby Swanson? And what I like is now you get presumably a month until Ozzie Albies comes back. You have a month window to view Vaughn Grissom in the big leagues against big league pitching so that you can say, okay, is he ready to take over as our starting shortstop next year? Do we need to sign a bridge guy, a veteran, to come in for a year? Or do we need to re-sign Dansby and look at moving Vaughn Grissom to left field or something? So it's invaluable experience you're getting right now. Teams would pay a ton of money for the ability to do this with every single player, get this kind of info. So definitely going to watch that. And then DL Hall got called up to start on Saturday by the Baltimore Orioles against the Rays. The number 2 pitching prospect in that system behind Grayson Rodriguez, and the number 3 prospect in that system behind Gunnar Henderson. Our bestie, our favorite prospect, Gunnar Henderson. And it was mixed results. So 3 2/3 innings against the Rays, 5 hits, 5 runs, 3 walks and 6 strikeouts. And I think a big thing here is, so he's got tons of tools, right? Like we've had this conversation, and a little bit later, I'm actually going to play the rest of the conversation I had Thursday night with Connor Newcomb, host of LockedOn Orioles. We talked about DL Hall versus Grayson Rodriguez. We talked Gunnar Henderson. And then because I cover Auburn baseball for Sports Illustrated, we also talked about their draftee, Trace Bright, who pitched at Auburn and is now in the Orioles system. So that's all coming after the break. But this start, 3 2/3, 5 hits, 5 runs, 3 walks, 6 strikeouts. And the thing here, we knew that DL Hall had a ton of tools, like fantastic velo for a lefty, had a lot of weapons. The thing was, and you could kind of see this when you go back and you watch this start, it was control. Like command. He had to not walk so many guys, walked 3 guys in the game. And he really got kind of done wrong. I mean, some of these, he gave up 2 hard hit balls, but he had like 2 hits soft into like away from a shift. I mean, really wasn't all on him. So all in all, I loved what I saw as far as the stuff and how it played against big leaguers. I mean, 3 2/3, struck out 6 guys. The stuff is there. I feel like a lot of pitching prospects, that first outing, you're going to struggle with the command and the control because you're so amped up. I mean, he was drafted 5 years ago and he was so excited to make it to the big leagues. So I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to reach his potential. We won't see what he can do as a starter until next year because the Orioles have decided that they actually want to send him to AAA Norfolk, convert him into a reliever for the rest of this season. Now, this is obviously something that we have seen work fine. The Braves did this with Mike Soroka. The Dodgers did this with Walker Buehler. I'm now, as I say this, beginning to realize maybe those aren't the best examples, but plenty of teams have done this where you bring a top prospect up, you let them pitch out of the bullpen in the stretch run. They can take a couple innings if they're still stretched out, but it's a little bit of a lower stress and an easier way to acclimate to big league hitting before you then have them prepared to be a starter coming out of spring training. So I'm confident his stuff is going to play. I think the big thing here is, in their mind, this is going to kind of cap his innings. This is the first time in 3 years he's had to play a full season. 2021, he threw 31 2/3 innings. He didn't have a 2020 season. And 2019, he only threw 80 innings. And so when you look at right now, he's already at 77 plus innings when you count a little bit of time in high A, double A, and then the majority of it, his 18 starts in triple A. So you give him a chance to lower the workload a bit. I like it, provided that he gets to go back to starting next year. So we'll see what happens, but either way, really impressed. The fastball looked good. The second inning, I think, was kind of encapsulates what DL Hall can be, right? 3 strikeouts, strikes out the side on 12 pitches. One punchies on a fastball, one's on a changeup, third one's on another fastball, I think. So, that second inning is a microcosm of this is what he can be. He can be a callback to yesterday's show. He can be a number 2 for you. Not going to call anybody a number 1 pitcher. He can be a number 2 for you. When he's on, it's just a matter of keeping that command where you're not walking too many guys. I mean, he walked, in AAA, 70 innings, he walked 44 guys. I mean, 5.5 walks per 9 innings, too high. Needs to be significantly lower to truly be a number 2. If he keeps walking that many guys, it's going to be a number 3 kind of situation. But in just a minute, I'm going to bring you the conversation with Connor. Great conversation again. We talked Trace Bright, their draft pick guy that I covered here at Auburn last year. And then we go into talking about some of the prospects. We talk Gunnar Henderson. We talk DL Hall versus Grayson Rodriguez. Interesting conversation. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. If you have not tried the Built Bar Puffs yet, you are really depriving yourself. Like, it is a great joy, and there is a new flavor. It is delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. So the cookie dough chunk puffs have a light and chewy texture with real cookie dough chunks. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. It's all the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it, and it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs are 160 calories, only 160 calories, and they have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. So run to Built.com to snag a box for you and your family. It's the perfect treat. If you want to just find a good hiding place and stash them for yourself, that is perfectly fine. You have our permission. So go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15. New promo code here, LOCKEDON15, LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off order. That's promo code LOCKEDON15 at Built.com.
All right, so for the first time, we welcome Lindsey Crosby into the show. He is the host of Locked On MLB Prospects here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And if you listen to his pod, you will hear a good amount about the Orioles, of course, being one of the top prospect systems in all of baseball. And Lindsey, first of all, thank you so much for hopping on Locked On Orioles for your first time.
Very, very glad to be here. Like you said, we talk the Orioles a ton. Fun fact, the favorite prospect of this pod is actually Gunnar Henderson. So there you go.
And you know, we learned that he's the favorite prospect of Baseball America earlier this week as well, when they ranked him number one. We're going to get to that in a bit, but I actually wanted to start with kind of continuing our draft coverage here on the podcast. We try to profile everybody that the Orioles select and sign, which means we won't be talking about Nolan McLean and others, unfortunately, here on this podcast. But next up is Trace Bright. And this is kind of the perfect situation here, Lindsey, because not only can we have you on to talk Orioles prospects, but you were covering Auburn baseball this spring, where Bright had a great third season with the Auburn Tigers before the Orioles selected the right-hander in the 5th round. He, had a 5.13 ERA, but did get better as the season went on, 94 Ks in about 80 innings. So kind of, from someone who watched him throw a lot this spring, what are the Orioles getting in what ended up being the highest pitcher that they were able to draft and sign in this year's draft?
So Trace is very much a greater than the stats kind of guy. He's one of those pitchers that, so cons first, doesn't necessarily have an out pitch. He's got a fastball, sits mid 90s, velocity's fine. It sometimes fades a little bit late in games. Has a curveball and a slider, but both of them don't have, the slider has like a short, firm break to it. Doesn't necessarily have a ton of movement on it. The curveball is a 12-6, which I absolutely love 12-6 curveballs because you can attack both lefties and righties with them. And then a changeup that's kind of inconsistent. Good fade when it's on, but kind of inconsistent. The big thing that I do love about Trace Bright is he understands how to mix the pitches up, and he knows how to react when one of them isn't there. He knows how to get outs with the other ones. And if you kind of go back and you look into some of the starts and you look at some of the games that he did at Auburn, you'd have an interesting situation where he's cruising through 4 or 5, and then he gives up a couple runs at the end. Or what's even worse is he leaves a couple guys on and the reliever allows a couple to score. So some of those runs that you see from him are inherited runners. Some of the runs that you see are very end of the game, or they have a big lead and he's just eating some innings. But overall, very good pitcher at understanding. And you can see at his time at Auburn, and has he progressed. His sophomore year was thrown into starting, probably wasn't ready. And then was one of the more consistent starters all season for Auburn his junior year. Just really understands pitching and understands how to get outs, and has the mental side of it there.
You mentioned that slider shape, and that's a pitch that we've seen a lot recently. Now more guys kind of going back to the sweeper, not going back to the sweeper, kind of adding that sweeper slider. So It's interesting to see different kind of sliders out there. But, what did kind of the fastball velo look like throughout this year? And what does the rest of the arsenal do for Trace? Because you mentioned that, he doesn't really have that, go-to out pitch. So, for some guys like that, I know it's more about using that full arsenal. So what does that look like for him?
Yeah. Going back through my notes I have here in my Auburn baseball notebook, he typically sits 94, 95. He does excel. Something he doesn't get enough credit for is he does excel at taking something off of a fastball when he knows you're sitting fastball. If he's in a count where like he has to throw a fastball for a strike, and he can throw a lot of his pitches on either side of the plate for a strike, but the fastball is the one he has the best control of. He's good at taking just a little bit off, maybe a 93, so that you might make contact, but you might swing over it. You might, not get a solid hit, but he sits around 94, 95. The good thing is I do think 6'4", 199, he does have the frame where it's projectable a bit. He can add a little bit more muscle, add a little bit more velo, and he is a very good athlete. So I could see that increasing by a couple miles an hour in the big leagues.
And then, in terms of the command and the walks, I mean, it's not a crazy, terrible number. You'd like it to be a little lower than about 4.2 walks per nine that he had this year. What do you kind of look at it in terms of command? Because, it did get a little bit worse actually from his, first full season in 21 to 2022. Now, he threw 30 more innings as well. And, he was pitching in bigger spots, but is the command a concern at all for him?
So the command, not necessarily. A big thing that Auburn focused on with the pitching staff is understanding that a lot of extra base hits at that level are thrown, not hit. The extra base hit came around because you put the ball in a bad spot. You missed, but and you can miss. You're allowed to miss. But when you miss middle, you're asking for trouble. And so a lot of what Trace tried to focus on was living on the outside of the plate. So a lot of those walks came from, he's like, okay, I'm going to throw this curveball and I'm aiming to catch the outside corner. And if I miss, I'm going to miss outside. I'd rather walk him than, let him get a base hit with a guy on third. So some of it was deliberate. There is some room for improvement. And you're right. The raw numbers by themselves don't look great, but a lot of it was just trying to make sure that if you made a mistake, you weren't going to get punished for it, because was kind of the story of his 2021 season was just, missing, when he leaves a fastball above the belt, that's where a hitter can really do damage with it. He does well pitching low. Or when he misses a slider and the slider misses middle versus missing outside, a hitter can do damage with it. So that was something that they specifically kind of worked on was if you're going to miss away.
Yeah, and he's an interesting guy because, the Orioles took a pitcher in the 5th round in 2021 in Carlos Tavera, who was kind of a small school guy at UT Arlington, not facing the best competition, but had these gaudy numbers. Mm-hmm. This year in the 5th round, they go with Trace Bright, who not necessarily the numbers that jump off the page, but pitching in the SEC every weekend, facing the best hitters in college baseball, and has the underlying numbers and I'm sure, the TrackMan statistics that want the Orioles obviously to jump all over him. So my last thing on Bright is, with Nolan McLean not signing, we weren't sure if he was going to be a two-way player with the O's or maybe just be a pitcher, but Bright becomes the top drafted pitcher by the Orioles this year. What does kind of the ceiling you think look like for him? Because obviously the O's would love for him to be a starter at the big league level, but what do you think that, kind of top 1 or 2% outcome for him looks like?
I think top 1 or 2% is probably, a number 3 or 4. Most realistic is probably a 4 or 5. It's something where having a strong trio of secondaries that you can throw for strikes gives you a legitimate starter's arsenal, and you have the frame and you're an athlete. But like you said, the walk rate's a little high. I think his first career, it's about 10%, and then missing with getting that fastball location a little better. And then just not having a carrying pitch does kind of limit the ceiling a bit. But I do see him as somebody, number 4, number 5 can go out there and pitch 140 innings for you in a season and be that guy to take the ball every 5th day. That was the big thing for Auburn. I think he was the only starter to pitch every weekend from the beginning of the season to the end. So that's the big thing is availability is a skill. And Trace Bright is an athlete that can compete and ultimately can throw strikes.
And getting into the Orioles system, we'll see what they want to do with him as well. You never know because an Arsenal in college could look a little different once a major league team gets your hands on him as well. But we'll get back to our chat with Lindsey Crosby in just a second, talk more about the current Orioles system, guys like Gunnar Henderson and who Lindsey likes in one of the top systems.
We're going to get back to our chat with Connor in just a minute, but first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You get reviews and news of every league, Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, golf, esports. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, live in-game betting, scores, whatever it is, they have you covered. So head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action, because BetOnline is where the game starts.
And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by betonline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. And you can find news on every league. It's not just Major League Baseball, of course, getting into the playoff run, but we've got the NFL coming soon, the NBA and the NHL right behind it. And every weekend, of course, there's combat sports, there's esports, and even golf as well. And BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for everything for your sports wagering needs. So head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today at BetOnline, where the game starts. So we're here with Lindsey Crosby, the host of Locked On MLB Prospects here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And Lindsey, this was a perfect time to have you on because not just did we want to talk about Trace Bright and his time at Auburn, but exciting time for the Orioles with a whole lot of new prospect lists coming out this week from the different outlets. I think the craziest one I did see was Prospects Live put out theirs on Thursday. They had 8 Orioles in their top 100. 8 in the top 100. Now that is kind of the top of the line, but where I want to start, of course, is Gunnar Henderson. Baseball America named him the new #1 prospect in baseball on Monday. And so I pose you the question, do you agree with Baseball America? Do you think Gunnar Henderson is the top prospect in baseball? And if not, where do you think he kind of falls in among the other top players in the minor leagues right now?
To me, he's definitely, like, you can't argue that he's not at least a top 3. I do think he's #1. I've seen people who have him 2 or 3, but I think when you can look at the performance that he's put up, he has a 151 WRC plus. It's third highest among all hitters in AAA that have at least 200 at-bats. And he's also one of the youngest players in AAA. So, I mean, like on the season, slash line of 300, 427, 546, on pace for a 2020 season for home runs and stolen bases. It's something where, like, as the prospect apparatus, as the industry, we throw around the words 5-tool player way too much. We say it way more than we should. Gunnar Henderson's one of the few people that legitimately looks like he has 5 tools. Now, the thing is, none of them are like the best in baseball. He's not the most powerful hitter. He doesn't have the best contact tool or the best arm, but he is above average to plus at everything. And he's a lot more valuable and deserving of the #1 prospect spot if he stays at short. If he does move to third, which I think may or may not be possible, part of that depends on the other guys around him. But he still profiles to be, I think, somebody who will contend for all-star games and to be a star in MLB. We are big fans of Gunnar Henderson here on Locked On MLB Prospects. And fun fact, and this is unrelated to loving Gunnar Henderson, he was drafted by the Orioles in 2019 while committed to go to Auburn.
He's, what could have been? What could have been him in the middle of that Auburn Tigers lineup? Maybe they take home a title in Omaha the last couple of years if they've got Gunnar Henderson. But the Orioles were happy to get him, sign him out of high school. And now, he's just been one of the fastest risers in all of minor league baseball. And it was, great to see him. Even at the end of last year when he got up to Double-A, people start to take notice. And then all of a sudden, he starts the year at Double-A. He just shoots through the system. He's hitting basically just as well at AAA. He's hit lefties even better at AAA. He talked about that in an article in the Baltimore Sun this week, saying that, he had some bad numbers against lefties in Double-A. And he basically said, I see more consistent lefties in AAA. It's the most consistent lefties I've seen. And he basically was like, that's why I'm better, because I'm seeing them more. So it's almost just like he just had to get used to some left-handers. It wasn't like he's, got this big hole in his swing. And that's another reason why he is the #1 prospect. But, the Orioles
I actually pulled the splits for him. And as of Wednesday, he 1/3 of all of his at-bats in AAA have been lefties. He has an 813 OPS against lefties, significantly better than when he was in Bowie. and something where, I mean, Tim Gibbons has talked about it. Like, he specifically has worked on hitting lefties. He's also cut his strikeout rate from 30% to 20% year over year. And he's lowered his swinging strike by about 2%. And so I know that there's some folks who are asking for him to get called up now, but know that while he's in Norfolk with Tim Gibbons, he has legitimately been getting significantly better at the game of baseball.
We love Tim Gibbons on this podcast. Frankly, the coaching staff in Norfolk, I think, is one of the best around the minors, with Buck Britton, who in the next 10 years or maybe less is going to be a big league manager.
Less than 10.
Justin Ramsey has been just outstanding working with these Orioles pitchers. And then Tim Gibbons is kind of the guy who goes a little under the radar just because he's not as front facing as those other two guys, but he does a great job with the hitters as well. Now, this Orioles system is stacked, as I said. I mean, shout out to Prospects Live, maybe our new number one favorite prospect publication here on the podcast, for putting 8 Orioles in their new top 100 on Thursday. But they've got a long list of those guys. And among the guys who are kind of around that Orioles top 10, who is your next favorite guy to watch in the Orioles system? Give me a pitcher and give me another hitter not named Gunnar Henderson who you're excited for, not just, watching him on MILB TV, but you're excited to get him to Baltimore.
Okay. Kyle Stowers, the outfielder. We'll go with the outfielders first. So he's a guy, a 2019 second rounder out of Stanford. And it was something where the story there was great exit velo. He's got power potential. And then the question was, how well would he hit? It's something where when you watch him swing, I mean, it is violent. It is fun to watch because you can imagine the baseball exploding when he hits it. But he's gotten better at the actual job of hitting. The thing we talk about a lot on my podcast is power's only as good as your hit tool is. And he's gotten significantly better at that. He's cut his strikeout rate down about 9% this year from last year. Swinging strike rate is low. And specifically, the thing he's worked on that makes me excited to see him debut soon, if he does, is working with velo up in the zone. The elevated fastball is such a big part of MLB right now. And so he specifically, shout out to Tim Gibbons for helping him with this, but specifically has gone and worked on handling velocity up in the zone and worked on less chasing out of the zone. And so I think he can play center field in a pinch. You got Cedric Mullins. You put him into right field with that plus arm he has, that good speed he has. And it's something where I think he has the potential to be much better than, the 10th or 11th best prospect in the system when it's all said and done. I think he has the potential to be a top 3 or 4 player as the system stands right now.
Yeah, and Kyle Stowers, we talk about a lot on this podcast because he's had over 400 plate appearances in AAA now. He was the co-minor league player of the year for the Orioles last year with, you may have heard of him, Adley Rutschman.
That guy, yeah.
Orioles fans, especially after trading Trey Mancini, opened up some at-bats on this major league team, a team that is competing for a playoff spot right now. And it just feels, he's got 18 homers now. He's got, I think, almost 50 extra base hits at this point in AAA. It's just time to get him to the big leagues. He might not play every day because the Orioles still have Hayes, Mullins, Santander pretty much locked down in the outfield. But between DH and giving those guys a day off, you can play Stowers 4 to 5 times a week and make your team better right now. He's maxed out on what he can do at AAA. But turn to the pitchers, because we know the Orioles have 2 high-level pitching prospects right now. So I'm assuming this question is, are you a Grayrod guy or are you a DL Hall guy?
So I think Grayson Rodriguez is great. He's a lovely person. I'm excited to see what he'll do. Give me some DL Hall, a lefty who can hit 100 miles an hour with a plus slider. Give me that guy 7 days a week and Sunday after church. I mean, I think that ceiling, great, Grayson Rodriguez has a higher ceiling. Absolutely has a higher ceiling. He looks like he legitimately could potentially be a number 1 pitcher, an ace, which you only, you have maybe 12 of those in baseball. He has the tools to do that. But DL Hall is tons of fun to watch. I think at this point, so much about him. Worst case scenario, you're looking at a high leverage late inning reliever, a closer type. But just, 100 mile an hour fastball. He sits 97 on that thing. Can touch triple digits. The slider is a plus pitch. curveball is slower. I wish it was a little more vertical. It's a little kind of too plain, and it doesn't necessarily do exactly, it's not great either direction. Just make it more vertical and go all for it. But and then work on the change a bit. But I just love watching DL Hall pitch. So to me, despite the injuries, I think DL Hall is the guy. He's on the 40-man roster, so you can call him up. And all it takes is a 25-man roster move. So I want to see DL Hall get a cup of coffee at the end of the year this year.
Yeah, I honestly, had been on the train so long of call him up, have him be a starter immediately. But now that he's not up yet and the Orioles are in a postseason race, I don't think it hurts to Adam Wainwright him, John Smoltz him, if you have to, because we saw him in big league spring training throw a couple innings out of the bullpen. He was just coming in facing big league lefties, 100, 90 mile per hour slider, see you later. Yep. And, if the Orioles could have that at the back end of already a top 5 bullpen in baseball, and then you know what you do next year coming out of spring training, you move him back to a starter. But for the last 2 months to get him in the big leagues, don't think it's a bad idea. But Lindsay, the last thing I wanted to ask you before you go is everybody's got those prospect crushes who, aren't necessarily on everybody's mind, not necessarily those top 5 guys. For me, I don't know if I'm stealing your guy, but I love Joey Ortiz. I called his games in summer ball 5 years ago when he was a little known prospect out of New Mexico State playing for a bad summer ball team actually in Baltimore. And I said, this guy's going to be good. And Joey Ortiz, no one can get him out in AA right now. I was wondering if you had anybody in the Orioles system who's not, the Henderson, the Rodriguez, the Hall, even the Jackson Holiday, who you feel like, this guy's going to surprise people and be a good big leaguer.
So for me, because I watch prospects all the time, I see so many guys that fit the conventional profile. So I am attracted to the guys that are very outside of the mold. So the guy that I'm really excited, and he hasn't done much this year, the guy I'm really excited to watch is Jared Beck. So 13th rounder out of St. Leo, but the 7-foot tall lefty. So, he throws mid-90s. I could see him being a bullpen guy with a shorter stint. He has fantastic velocity for being so incredibly long and having such long levers. He's got good command despite that. Throws strikes. I think the player development staff's really going to kind of enjoy working with Jared Beck. And I think that simply because of the unique angle that fastball comes in on, he's going to cause a lot of problems. And it's something where I think we're all kind of looking at the velocity. Oh, he throws low to maybe mid-90s. He's not going to be effective. But when you think about the extension and how close that ball is to the plate when he releases it, how it's going to play up, and then the unique approach angle, I think Jared Beck's going to be a guy that really surprises a lot of people with how effective he can be out of the bullpen.
Lindsay, I'm 6'4", and I can't wait to see Jared Beck in person for him to make me feel short. That's what I'm most excited for when he gets up to full season ball, maybe up here in Aberdeen, and I can go take a peek at Jared Beck. But Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us. Let everybody know where they can find you and where they can find, of course, your great podcast here on this very network.
I am on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. My show, Locked On MLB Prospects, available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. We can find us on Twitter at Locked On Farm. If you have questions for the show, we do mailbags every single Monday. Everything in there comes from listeners. You can send it to my Twitter, the show's Twitter, or email us, lockedonmlbprospects@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and enjoy continuing to watch some of the best young players in baseball, and a lot of them, luckily, reside in the Baltimore Orioles system.
Thanks for having me.